My father stood at the Thanksgiving table lit by the chandelier like he was giving a eulogy, not an announcement. "We're selling the family business," he said, "and you're getting nothing." My brother smirked. My sister clapped. The knife in my hand paused above the plate, not shaking, just waiting. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "Who's the buyer?" He puffed his chest, proud, certain of his power. "Everest Holdings. 50 million. I smiled. Because the truth was already sitting at that table with him. He just didn't know what I was about to take back next. I grew up in a house where silence had its own hierarchy. My father spoke, my brother followed my sister, performed, and I learned to take up as little space as possible. The dining table in that Boston suburb felt like a stage I was never invited to step on. Even as a child, I remember sitting at the far end, legs barely touching the floor, listening to them. Praise my brother for leadership, because he'd won a school debate while the coding trophy I'd set on the counter went unnoticed until my mother quietly moved it to a shelf. That pattern never changed. By the time I was a teenager, my brother had already been cast as the heir, the one destined to carry the family business forward. He didn't care about software. He cared about speedboats, designer jackets, weekends away with friends whose names changed every season. Still, my father clapped him on the back like he was watching a legacy unfold. My sister found her place in curated perfection. Photo shoots on the lawn, sponsored posts from her bedroom, follower counts recited like prayer. My father indulged her as long as she kept the family image glossy. She did, vigorously. And me, I found refuge in my room, my old desk, my laptop, lines of code forming worlds I could control when everything else felt predetermined. My father would pass by the doorway, glance inside, and say things like, "It's good to have hobbies, sweetheart, but real business requires instinct." He never stayed long enough to see what I was actually building. The moment that shaped everything happened when I was 22. I had spent months working on an integration solution, cloud-based, scalable, the kind of thing that could pull the entire company out of its outdated systems. I prepared documents, charts, projections, every detail checked twice. My mother told me she was proud. My father told me not to overthink it. I walked into that boardroom carrying my laptop, the room full of men who'd known my father for decades, men who still remembered me as Harold's quiet kid. I set up the presentation. My hands were steady. My voice was steady. 10 minutes in, my father cut me off. A raised hand, a sigh through his nose, a smile that felt like dismissal dressed as patience. "That's enough," he said. "Creative ideas, but not realistic. Clients don't want experiments." The board members chuckled politely. Someone whispered, "Kids and their theories." I closed my laptop, packed each paper, slowly stacking them so they wouldn't bend. No one offered help. No one asked a question. I walked out hearing their voices rise again, smooth, confident, uninterrupted. That was the day I learned my place in the family, the day silence became my armor. The years that followed moved quietly the way dust settles on untouched shelves. Holidays became routines of polite distance. My father talking business with my brother, my sister filming every corner of the house, and me slipping into rooms where no one bothered to look. But the moment that snapped something loose didn't come with shouting. It came in a softer, cleaner cut. Last Thanksgiving, I arrived after a delayed flight, the air still clinging to my coat. The hallway smelled of roasted squash and expensive candles. My sister waved at her phone, narrating her outfit of the day. My brother complained about stress from managing clients he barely understood. No one asked how I was. I wasn't surprised anymore. What caught me wasn't the noise, it was the absence. My name wasn't on the place cards. Every year, my mother arranged them in neat calligraphy, one at each setting. That night, there were 5 cards on the long table. Mine wasn't one of them. My father barely looked up when I stepped in. "Oh, Caroline," he said, "sit anywhere. Anywhere." While my brother and sister sat flanking him like a pair of bookends he'd spent a lifetime polishing. I slid into the empty seat at the far end, the one closest to the hallway. The chair legs scraped softly against the wood floor. My sister didn't notice. My brother smirked like the arrangement made perfect sense. During dinner, my father discussed future plans, never once using the word we. At one point, my brother claimed credit for landing a major client. I knew the truth that the client had approached the company only because of a white paper I'd written years ago, one my father dismissed and filed away. I didn't correct him. The spoon in my hand stopped halfway to my mouth, suspended there as I listened to them rewrite history like I wasn't sitting right there. When dessert arrived, my father toasted to my 2 diligent children and glanced down the table toward my brother and sister. The space where he might have looked at me remained empty. I didn't flinch. I didn't ask why. I just placed my spoon gently on the plate, and I smiled. After that, Thanksgiving silence followed me back to San Francisco like a shadow that finally decided to keep pace. I returned to my apartment overlooking the bay, the kind of view that used to make me feel small. That night, it felt like the only thing wide enough to hold what I'd carried for years. I set my bag down, took off my coat, turned on the single lamp near my desk. Then I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked once waiting. I did too. For most of my life, I had responded to dismissal by shrinking. This time, I responded with structure, with process, with the cold clarity that comes from realizing no one is coming to hand you a place at the table. So I built my own. I started by pulling up the financial dashboard of the company I had quietly created after leaving home. No logos, no announcements, just years of coded work contracts signed under a pseudonym teams hired because they believed in the systems I designed, not the name I carried. The numbers were steady rising, profitable. I opened another tab: quarterly reports for my father's company. The language was polished, the graphs confident but underneath decline. Slow but steady, outdated infrastructure. Clients slipping toward competitors with better integration protocols. I took a sip of water, set the glass down perfectly straight. Then I began collecting what I needed: contracts, payments, supplier histories, acquisition notes, internal audits, meeting minutes from mergers relevant to the software industry. Each document slid into organized folders labeled cleanly, precisely. The soft clicks of the mouse became their own rhythm, steady, unhurried, unbreakable. I scanned the corporate structure, tracing each partner company my father relied on. I studied them like puzzle pieces, weak points, opportunities. My company began acquiring shares quietly, legally, through intermediaries who never questioned the strategy. No hacking, no manipulation. Just patient positioning. Every move was a step. Every step was intentional. By winter, I held partial ownership of multiple suppliers that kept my father's operations afloat. By spring, I controlled enough influence to propose joint ventures. By summer, I had structured and offer a clean acquisition proposal from a firm he'd never suspect built atop my own company's architecture, but shielded through layers of authorized representatives. I filed the offer, waited, received the rejection I expected, prompt, dismissive, barely even reviewed. Just like me. Instead of stopping, I refined the proposal, strengthened it, brought in external advisors who validated the logic. By early fall, I was preparing the final version, the one he wouldn't be able to refuse. A version backed by unanimous board interest market analysis and the promise of modernizing a business crumbling under nostalgia. During those months, no one in my family asked where I was, not for birthdays, not for holidays, not for the meetings they posted about online lined up like trophies. The quiet didn't hurt anymore. It simply clarified. My best friend, who'd known me since my early years of cheap ramen and secondhand furniture, asked once, "Are you sure you want to tie yourself to them again?" I didn't answer right away. I just opened my laptop again, the screen lighting my face in a cold white glow. "This isn't about going back," I said. "It's about drawing the line they never thought I'd reach." She nodded, the kind of nod you give someone who's finally speaking a truth they've held for a decade. The night before Thanksgiving, I sat alone in my office as the building emptied around me. The hum of the heater, the faint echo of footsteps disappearing down the hall, the bay outside my window dark and patient. I reviewed the acquisition file one last time, checked the records for accuracy, verified the signatures, confirmed the advisory notes, filed the final version with legal. Every action was small, almost invisible, but each one carried the weight of the years I'd been talked over, talked around, talked past. When everything was ready, I closed my laptop, slid it into my bag beside the folder of printed documents. placed my name card case on top minimalist brushed metal, cold against my fingers. I straightened the items until they aligned perfectly. Then I exhaled. The next morning, I boarded a flight to Boston. The sky outside the plane window was a flat sheet of gray, a quiet color, a focused one. My father's house looked the same as always, grand, cold, trimmed neatly for guests who were never me. I entered carrying nothing dramatic, no speeches, no anger, just the tools of a woman who had spent 10 years becoming the person they thought she'd never be. I set my bag gently in my old room. The dust on my childhood trophies glimmered in slanted morning light. I let the silence linger there for a moment, tracing the edges of who I'd been and who I'd built. Then I walked downstairs, folder tucked under my arm. For the first time in my life, I wasn't returning as a daughter. I was returning as a decision. This time, I wouldn't fix what they'd broken. Thanksgiving dinner began the way it always did. My father at the head of the table, my brother beside him, like an understudy waiting for a cue, my sister live-streaming the centerpiece as if it were a celebrity. I sat at the far end, the place where sound dimmed and decisions never landed. Dessert had barely touched the table when my father tapped his knife against his glass. The room stilled. "We're selling the family business," he said, voice warm with self-satisfaction. "And you're getting nothing." My brother laughed. My sister clapped. Their reactions were so rehearsed they might as well have practiced them in the mirror. I didn't move. The candle nearest me flickered, bending toward the empty space between us. I lifted my eyes. "Dad," I said, tone even. "Who's the buyer?" He straightened, pleased with the question. "A firm called Everest Holdings. They're paying $50 million. A murmur ran through the table. My brother's eyebrows shot up in sudden greed. My sister whispered it into her phone like she'd discovered breaking news. I pressed a fingertip to the stem of my water glass, aligning it with the edge of my plate. Then I smiled. "Dad," I said quietly, "I am Everest Holdings." The reaction happened in waves. My sister's phone slipped from her hand. My brother's fork clattered against his plate. My mother exhaled sharply, wine glass trembling. My father didn't move at first. He blinked as if the room had shifted positions without informing him. "That's not possible," he said finally, a thin edge entering his tone. "Everest Holdings is run by someone named Caroline Stone," I finished for him. "Yes, that's me." He studied my face with the same look he'd given me in that boardroom 10 years ago, trying to parse what he had overlooked. I reached into my bag, placed a small metal case on the table, opened it, slid one name card across the polished wood. The logo was simple, almost stark. The name beneath it was mine. My father didn't pick it up. My brother did, snatching it like it might offer loopholes. "This is a joke," he said, voice cracking. "You don't have the money for this." "I built it," I said. Contract by contract, acquisition by acquisition, quietly, legally. My mother finally spoke. "Caroline, all these years." "All these years," I echoed. My father leaned forward. "Even if this were true, which it isn't, the board would never approve a sale to you." "They already did," I said, unanimously. I removed the folder from my bag, set it beside the name card, opened it so the signatures faced him. His face drained first of color, then of power. "You manipulated," "No," I said. "I followed the process. Advisory review, legal compliance, market valuation, standard procedure." I paused. "Everything you taught us to respect." My brother shoved his chair back. "This isn't fair. I've worked there for years." I looked at him steady. "I know about the vendor payments, the false billing, the offshore transfers." His face froze. "I could file a report," I added, keeping my tone clinically neutral. "Or you can repay the money and resign." Quietly. My sister swallowed hard. "What about me?" "You can stay," I said, "but you'll work. Media branding, actual deliverables. No image without contribution." My father finally stood, hands braced on the table. "You expect me to accept this? To hand my company, my legacy, over to you?" I didn't raise my voice. "I'm not asking you to accept it. It's already done." Silence spread across the room like a slow-moving tide, inevitable, heavy reshaping everything it touched. My father sank back into his chair, the realization landing on him, one breath at a time. "You planned this. For 10 years," I said, "not to destroy you, to save what you were losing. No one spoke. Not my brother, whose world had just shrunk. Not my sister, whose phone stayed on the table screen dark. Not my mother, whose eyes softened with a grief she couldn't name. The dessert candles burned low. The clock on the wall ticked. And for the first time in my life, the silence belonged to me. 6 months passed before I realized how different the world felt when no one was trying to shrink you back into the shape they preferred. The building that once housed my father's company had been renovated, glass replacing heavy drapes, open space replacing closed doors. The old conference room, the one where he stopped my presentation mid-sentence a decade ago, now held quiet light from a skylight we installed. Whenever I walked by, I didn't speed up or look away. I just breathed. My father had taken the advisory role. I offered no authority, only presence. The first few weeks were stiff ceremonial. Then something softened. He stopped lecturing in meetings. He started listening. Sometimes I'd catch him watching the younger developers explain new workflows, his expression a mix of confusion and reluctant wonder. My brother repaid what he owed, went back to school. For the first time, he sent me a message that didn't ask for anything, just a line about a class he liked. I didn't respond right away. I read it twice, then set the phone down quietly. My sister built a media unit for the company. Real work, real metrics. She filmed an internal piece about women in tech and didn't mention her follower count once. When she showed it to me, she waited not for praise, but for feedback. I gave it. She nodded, serious, absorbing it. At home in San Francisco, mornings felt different. I'd sit by the window with my coffee, the steam tracing upward, like a reminder of breath I'd held too long. The bay moved the way it always had, slow, steady, but I saw it with new clarity. My apartment was the same. The quiet inside me wasn't. Some nights I passed by my old childhood trophies that I'd brought west after the restructuring. I didn't dust them or arrange them. I simply let them sit. What they represented was no longer something I needed to prove. One evening, I returned to Boston for a quarterly review. As I left the office, I glanced into the dining room where everything had fractured that Thanksgiving. The table was empty now, no candles, no applause, just chairs pushed in neatly. Silence again, but this time it sounded like air I could finally breathe. In the months that followed, distance stopped feeling like abandonment and started feeling like choice. The boundaries I'd drawn didn't close anything. They clarified everything. My family moved differently around me now, not out of fear, but recognition. I didn't need their permission to take up space, and they finally saw there was never anything small about what I'd built. I stood once more at the long dining table, now cleared sunlight catching the polished wood. No voices, no corrections, no performance, just a quiet truth settling into place. Sometimes the silence that remains is the part you get to keep.